High above the world, where clouds brush the shoulders of mountains and silence carries the weight of centuries, the Andes rise. Their ridges stretch like ancient ribs of the earth, sheltering valleys where people once lived, prayed, and worked among the stones. Here, at these altitudes where the air grows thin and the stars seem close enough to touch, empires were born and empires faded, leaving only quiet echoes in terraces, temples, and forgotten roads. This is not a tale of war and conquest, nor of loud victories and sudden defeats. This is the story of mountains themselves, and of the people who learned to call them home. A story to be listened to slowly, like the whisper of wind moving across a high meadow, or the trickle of water that falls from glacier to stream to valley. As we begin this long journey together, allow yourself to set aside the noise of the day. Breathe in, as though you are breathing the thin air of the Andes. Let your shoulders rest, let your eyes grow heavy. The past will come quietly in soft fragments as we wander through stone and sky. And if you find comfort in these quiet stories, if these echoes help you to rest, know that more journeys like this await. You can follow along gently by subscribing, not as an obligation, but as an open doorway, always waiting whenever you need another calm night among forgotten places. Now, let us step onto the high ridges of the Andes together, beginning with the vast breadth of the mountains themselves. The fall of Cusco did not mean the silence of the Andes, though the Spaniards claimed the Inca capital and placed their own stones atop temples. The spirit of resistance lingered, hidden in valleys, whispered in forests, and carried on the breath of mountains. For the people of the Andes, surrender was not instant, nor was memory erased. Instead, it took on quieter forms, resistance that was patient, subtle, and often concealed among the ridges and shadows. One of the most powerful echoes of this defiance rose in the Vilcabamba region, a remote valley surrounded by steep mountains and dense forests. Here, the remnants of the Inca nobility established a last refuge. From 1537 until 1572, Vilcabamba became the hidden capital of a resisting Inca state. Though smaller than the vast empire that had stretched from Ecuador to Chile, it carried the dignity of survival. Roads led to it in secrecy, guarded by forests and rivers, making it a sanctuary where the old ways could continue. Imagine walking into such a hidden valley. The forest hums with life, birds, insects, streams cutting through the undergrowth. Mist hangs heavy, blurring the line between earth and sky. Amid this greenery rise terraces, not as grand as those in Cusco but still carefully shaped. Fires burn in courtyards, families cook maize, priests offer coca leaves to the mountains, and warriors keep watch from the ridges. The Spaniards may have ruled the cities, but here, deep in the folds of the Andes, the heart of resistance still beat. Leaders like Manco Inca and his descendants kept the flame alive. Though they could not gather the entire empire back together, they symbolized the refusal to let memory fade. Raids were launched from the hidden valleys, striking Spanish convoys, reclaiming goods, reminding the conquerors that their rule was never absolute. Songs and prayers in Quechua continued, rituals to the sun and earth persisted, and children grew up learning not only of the fall but of the greatness that had been, even beyond Vilcabamba. Resistance took quieter shapes. Villagers maintained festivals under the guise of new Christian feasts, weaving the old gods into the new saints. Stories of the Apis, the mountain guardians, were told in whispers, their presence never doubted even when forbidden. The weaving of cloth carried patterns of memory, the playing of flutes carried melodies older than conquest. In every terrace planted, in every coca leaf offered to the earth, defiance lived on. Pause here and picture a night in a hidden valley. A fire burns low, casting shadows against stone walls. Elders tell children of Cusco, of the temple of the sun, of the great roads that once stretched across the land. Their voices are hushed, but their words are steady. Outside, guards watch the forest paths, listening for footsteps, Overhead, the stars gleam bright, the same stars that guided their ancestors. In that moment, even in defeat, the Andes feel unbroken, their silence carrying both sorrow and resilience. When at last Vilcabamba fell in 1572, and the last Inca ruler, Tupac Amaru I, was captured and executed, the formal resistance ended. But the echo remained, it whispered in every valley, carried in the songs of shepherds, the prayers of farmers, the stories of families. The empire was gone, but the people endured, and with them endured the quiet defiance of memory. The echoes of resistance remind us that conquest is never absolute. Stones may be toppled, rulers may fall, but culture, spirit, and the breath of mountains continue, in hidden valleys, in whispered prayers, in the quiet resilience of daily life. The Andes carried on, waiting patiently for their voice to rise again. The Andes stretch along the western edge of South America like a vast spine running for thousands of kilometers from the southern reaches of Chile to the northern tips of Colombia and Venezuela. They are the longest continental mountain range in the world, yet their presence is more than mere geography. They are a living horizon, a barrier and a bridge, a place where earth and sky speak in whispers too old to be recorded on any scroll or stone. Imagine yourself standing at their base. The sun rises slowly, painting the snowy peaks with pink and pale gold. Shadows cling to the valleys, while condors, wings stretched wide, glide on thermals that rise invisibly from the earth's surface. The mountains do not rush. Breathe slowly, and that breath is felt in the rhythm of rivers, in the drifting of clouds, in the silent shift of glaciers. To the early peoples who found themselves wandering these lands, the Andes were not obstacles, but presences. Each peak had a spirit, each valley a guardian, each spring of water a voice. They were sacred not in name alone, but in the daily reality of survival. To drink, to plant, to walk, to rest, all these required a quiet pact with the mountain. If the earth gave, it gave carefully. If it withheld, no strength of man could overcome it. The breath of the Andes is thin. At higher altitudes, lungs must labor for air. Those who live here grew strong, their bodies adapting to the invisible challenge of oxygen scarcity. Faces weathered by sun and wind tell of generations who learned to walk slowly, to carry loads with patience, to respect the measure of each step. The mountains taught endurance, and endurance in turn shaped culture. But the Andes were never only difficulty. They also held abundance in unlikely forms. Glacial waters melted into streams that nourished valleys. The soil, though often stony, could be tamed into terraces where maize, potatoes, and quinoa grew. The high pastures fed llamas and alpacas, creatures woven into life as companions, as beasts of burden, and as sources of wool. The Andes gave, but they gave quietly, in exchange for care, not conquest. Step into a valley in your imagination. Fields rise in steps, built by hands that patiently move stone upon stone. Above, peaks glitter with snow even as the sun warms the terraces below. The silence is broken only by the faint call of a shepherd, the tinkling of bells around the necks of llamas, and the wind threading through tall grasses. This is the breath of the Andes, calm, continuous, unhurried. Mountains like these invite slowness. They do not reveal their secrets to the hasty traveler. To truly hear their echoes, one must linger, listening to the trickle of meltwater, watching mist curl like soft fabric over the ridges, feeling the patient press of altitude on the chest. And in that slowness, one begins to understand why people, long before the Incas, and long before written memory, chose not to leave. They chose instead to root their lives here, within stone and sky, bound to the mountains as children to an elder. The Andes are not merely background to history. They are the first and constant character in this story. Before temples, before empires, before quippus and roads, there was the mountain, always watching, always breathing, always echoing in silence. As night falls in these high places, stars spill across the sky in dizzying numbers. Without the interference of city lights, the heavens become an infinite woven cloth, each star like a bead stitched into darkness. The people of these mountains lifted their eyes to this sky for guidance, for stories, for the measure of planting and harvest. The stars were not distant but companions, another form of mountain breath, moving slowly across the dome of time. So, as we linger here, in this first step of our long journey through the Andes, let us not rush. Let the mountains breathe around us. Let their stillness fill the spaces within us that are often crowded by noise. For in this silence, in this breath, lies the foundation of all the civilizations that followed. The Andes stretch along the western edge of South America like a vast spine running for thousands of kilometers from the southern reaches of Chile to the northern tips of Colombia and Venezuela. They are the longest continental mountain range in the world, yet their presence is more than mere geography. They are a living horizon, a barrier and a bridge, a place where earth and sky speak in whispers too old to be recorded on any scroll or stone. Imagine yourself standing at their base. The sun rises slowly, painting the snowy peaks with pink and pale gold. Shadows cling to the valleys, while condors, wings stretched wide, glide on thermals that rise invisibly from the earth's surface. The mountains do not rush. Breathe slowly, and that breath is felt in the rhythm of rivers, in the drifting of clouds, in the silent shift of glaciers. To the early peoples who found themselves wandering these lands, the Andes were not obstacles, but presences. Each peak had a spirit, each valley a guardian, each spring of water a voice. They were sacred not in name alone, but in the daily reality of survival. To drink, to plant, to walk, to rest, all these required a quiet pact with the mountain. If the earth gave, it gave carefully. If it withheld, no strength of man could overcome it. The breath of the Andes is thin. At higher altitudes, lungs must labor for air. Those who live here grew strong, their bodies adapting to the invisible challenge of oxygen scarcity. Faces weathered by sun and wind tell of generations who learned to walk slowly, to carry loads with patience, to respect the measure of each step. The mountains taught endurance, and endurance in turn shaped culture. But the Andes were never only difficulty. They also held abundance in unlikely forms. Glacial waters melted into streams that nourished valleys. The soil, though often stony, could be tamed into terraces where maize, potatoes, and quinoa grew. The high pastures fed llamas and alpacas, creatures woven into life as companions, as beasts of burden, and as sources of wool. The Andes gave, but they gave quietly, in exchange for care, not conquest. Step into a valley in your imagination. Fields rise in steps, built by hands that patiently move stone upon stone. Above, peaks glitter with snow even as the sun warms the terraces below. The silence is broken only by the faint call of a shepherd, the tinkling of bells around the necks of llamas, and the wind threading through tall grasses. This is the breath of the Andes, calm, continuous, unhurried. Mountains like these invite slowness. They do not reveal their secrets to the hasty traveler. To truly hear their echoes, one must linger, listening to the trickle of meltwater, watching mist curl like soft fabric over the ridges, feeling the patient press of altitude on the chest. And in that slowness, one begins to understand why people, long before the Incas, and long before written memory, chose not to leave. They chose instead to root their lives here, within stone and sky, bound to the mountains as children to an elder. The Andes are not merely background to history. They are the first and constant character in this story. Before temples, before empires, before quippus and roads, there was the mountain, always watching, always breathing, always echoing in silence. As night falls in these high places, stars spill across the sky in dizzying numbers. Without the interference of city lights, the heavens become an infinite woven cloth, each star like a bead stitched into darkness. The people of these mountains lifted their eyes to this sky for guidance, for stories, for the measure of planting and harvest. The stars were not distant but companions, another form of mountain breath, moving slowly across the dome of time. So as we linger here, in this first step of our long journey through the Andes, let us not rush. Let the mountains breathe around us. Let their stillness fill the spaces within us that are often crowded by noise. For in this silence, in this breath, lies the foundation of all the civilizations that followed. Long before the Incas carved their roads across ridges, before Cusco was ever dreamed into being, there was a place deep in the Andean valleys where stone itself seemed to speak. The people who lived there gathered around a center that we now call Chaven de Huantar, a temple complex older than empires, older than the memory of most. The Chaven culture, flourishing around 900 BCE to 200 BCE, was not an empire in the sense of conquest and armies. It was instead a web of belief, a spiritual and cultural thread that stretched across the Andes like a quiet breath. To imagine Chaven, close your eyes and picture narrow valleys where rivers meet, their waters rushing with glacial strength. There rising from the landscape, stone walls appear, cut and fitted with care. The temple is not towering like the pyramids of Egypt, nor sprawling like the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Instead, it is compact, dense, and mysterious, as though it was built to hold secrets rather than display power. Corridors twist inside like veins within a body, dark passageways that hum softly with the rush of underground water. The architecture itself was alive, designed not only for ceremony but for sensation. Those who walked the stone halls of Chaven were not merely observers. They were participants in a carefully crafted experience. Imagine entering the temple. The light behind you fades and darkness takes over. A torch flickers, smoke curls, walls press close, and you hear the distant echo of water beneath the stone floor. Somewhere ahead, a conch shell horn sounds, its low note vibrating through the corridors like the voice of a god. You are no longer simply yourself. You are within the belly of something larger, ancient, and alive. At the heart of Chaven lies the Lanzan, a massive stone carved with the image of a fanged deity, part jaguar, part human, part serpent. Its form is not easy to decipher. Eyes face different directions, lines twist and curl, a mouth bears fangs that seem to grin and threaten all at once. For the people of Chaven, this figure was not just an idol but the axis of the world, the still point where earth, sky, and underworld met. To stand before it was to stand at the center of creation. The art of Chaven was unlike anything simple or ordinary. It was deliberately complex, full of interwoven figures, dualities, transformations. Jaguars blend into birds, serpents into humans, faces into patterns that reveal themselves only after long, patient staring. This was not decoration, it was teaching, mystery encoded in stone, meant to draw the mind into reflection and awe. To look upon Chaven's art was to be reminded that the world was never straightforward, that power lived in transformations, in the liminal spaces between one form and another. The people of Chaven gathered from across the mountains, traveling along rivers, valleys, and ridges to bring offerings. They carried pottery, textiles, shells from distant coasts, feathers from faraway forests. This was a center of exchange, not in goods alone but in ideas, in ritual, in identity. Here, scattered communities found common ground, binding themselves through the mysteries of the temple. At night, outside the temple walls, fires flickered, and the hum of drums and flutes rose into the thin air. Priests guided ceremonies, their bodies painted, their heads perhaps adorned with jaguar pelts or bird feathers, their voices carried in chants that merged with the sound of water and wind. Those who came to Chaven returned to their villages, with stories, with visions, with a sense that the mountains themselves had spoken through stone. The echo of Chaven is not only in ruins, It is in the way Andean cultures for centuries after continued to weave the jaguar, the serpent, and the condor into their myths and ceremonies. It is in the way stone itself remains sacred, carved and placed with care. It is in the shared belief that the mountains were alive, and that humans could, for a moment, step into dialogue with forces greater than themselves. Today, when travelers stand before the weathered stones of Chavin water, the air is still, yet not silent. The corridors remain, the Lanzan still stands, its fang smile carved deep into granite. One feels the presence not of emptiness, but of memory, as though the stone walls have held centuries of breath, centuries of footsteps, and they continue to hum with what once was. So let us linger here, among the whispers of stone. Let us feel the cool air of the corridors, hear the rush of underground water, and imagine the flicker of firelight on ancient carvings. For in Chavin, the Andes found their first great voice, a voice that would echo through cultures, through rituals, through stone across centuries. Far to the south of the lush high valleys, where the Andes lean into desert and the sky stretches unbroken, lies a mystery etched upon the very earth itself. Across the barren plains of southern Peru, lines stretch straight for kilometers, shapes unfold that can only be seen fully from the air, a vantage point the ancients did not have, yet somehow imagined. These are the Nazca lines, silent patterns cut into the desert floor, enduring for over 1,000 years under the watch of sun and wind. Picture the desert at dawn. The sand is cool, the horizon still tinged with the faint blush of night. Slowly, the sun climbs, washing the earth in pale light. From the ground, you might notice little more than shallow grooves carved into the stony surface, stones brushed aside to reveal lighter soil beneath. Yet if you could rise like a condor, as the Nazca believed spirits and deities could, the ground transforms. A hummingbird spreads its wings across the desert, delicate and precise. A spider curls long legs into the sand. A monkey, with a spiral tail, turns playfully toward the horizon. And among them, long, endless lines stretch straight as arrows crossing each other, fading into distance. The Nazca people lived between 200 BC and 600 CE, carving life from an arid land where water was scarce and survival was always in question. Their genius was not only in these massive geoglyphs, but also in the irrigation systems they built, underground aqueducts called puquillos that still function today, channeling hidden water through spiral wells. To live in the Nazca desert required both practicality and imagination, and perhaps the two were not separate. What purpose did the line serve? Scholars have suggested many answers. Ritual pathways walked during ceremonies, astronomical markers guiding planting and harvest, offerings to gods of water and fertility, messages to the spirits of the sky. To the people who made them, the purpose may have been many things at once, practical and sacred, visible and invisible. For in the Andean world, the line between the everyday and the spiritual was never firm. Every act of survival carried within it a prayer, and every prayer was also a kind of survival. Imagine a group of Nazca workers, carefully brushing stones aside with quiet patience. The desert is vast and still. The heat is not yet unbearable, but the day grows brighter. They walk in measured steps, following a plan known only to their community, perhaps guided by a shaman or priest. They do not see the whole figure from where they stand, but they trust in its shape. Their work is for something larger, for gods above, for ancestors watching, for the future yet to be born. At night, the desert cools quickly. The stars burn sharp and clear, unfiltered by moisture or haze. Under this vast dome of light, the Nazca must have felt close to the heavens. Their lines and figures below reflected the constellations above, as if the desert floor had become another sky, mirroring the one that watched over them. In this way, the desert was not empty at all. It was full of presence, of meaning, of silent patterns waiting to be read. Even now, when seen from an airplane or satellite image, the Nazca lines hold a strange power. They are not loud or monumental in the way of towering walls or golden temples. They are instead subtle, whispering across miles of earth, asking us to look differently. They endure not because they were carved deep, but because the desert itself has preserved them, guarding them under centuries of sun and silence. To stand on that desert plain is to feel small against immensity. The figures cannot be grasped by eye, only by imagination. You sense the presence of design, but not its entirety. Perhaps that is the point. The Nazca lines were never meant for a single pair of eyes, nor for a single moment of viewing. They were meant for the gods, for the sky, for time itself. So let us pause here in this quiet desert, where the ground itself has become a canvas of prayer. Let the stillness of the plains stretch out around you, endless and calm. Feel the slow heat of the sun rising, the soft grit of sand underfoot, the whisper of wind moving across patterns too large to see. In this silence, in these lines, desert speaks, not in words, but in shapes, in echoes, in mysteries that remain patient even after 1,000 years. Before the Incas wove their vast network of roads and temples across the Andes, other powers had already risen and shaped the highlands. They were not empires in the same form, not the loud conquerors that the later chronicles would record, but rather steady builders who left patterns of cities, stones, and traditions that would ripple forward through time. Among these to stand out as quiet architects of Andean history, the Wari and the Tiwanaku. The Wari flourished in the central highlands of Peru, their capital near Presente Ayacucho. The Tiwanaku thrived around the deep blue waters of Lake Titicaca, high in the Altiplano, where the air is thin and the horizon stretches endlessly. Though separated by geography, they were connected by ideas, trade, and the slow, patient weaving of Andean culture. Imagine first the Wari capital, laid out not as a chaotic sprawl but in an orderly grid, streets running straight, walls built from stone and adobe, canals guiding water through dry landscapes. This was one of the earliest planned cities in the Andes, a quiet marvel of organization. From their heartland, the Wari spread influence outward, not always through conquest, but through networks of roads, outposts, and shared styles of pottery and textiles. Their touch was not the crushing fist of empire, but the steady hand of integration, creating a cultural thread that bound distant valleys together. Now travel southward, to the shores of Lake Titicaca. The water is vast, shimmering under the thin mountain light, surrounded by hills and plains. Here rose the city of Tiwanaku with its monumental stones, gateways carved with intricate figures, and platforms that seemed to echo the very mountains. Round them, the people of Tiwanaku were master farmers, creating raised fields, woru-woru, surrounded by canals that moderated temperature and kept crops alive even in the harsh highland climate. Where others saw barren earth, they coaxed abundance, feeding thousands in a land where survival seemed fragile. At Tiwanaku's heart stood the gateway of the sun, a single carved block of stone depicting a central figure surrounded by radiating lines and smaller beings. It was not only architecture but cosmology, a vision of order set into stone. To walk among these ruins was to feel the presence of a people who saw themselves not as separate from the cosmos, but as a part of its rhythm, aligning their lives with sky, earth, and water. Both the Wari and the Tiwanaku remind us that the Andes were never a land of isolated villages alone. Long before the Incas, ideas traveled across valleys and mountains, carried by traders, pilgrims, and farmers. Pottery styles spread. Textiles bore patterns recognizable from distant lands, and roads stitched landscapes together. These were not silent shadows of history. They were foundations, quiet but firm, upon which later empires would build. Yet both the Wari and the Tiwanaku eventually faded. Climate shifted, resources strained, and cities that had once thrived slowly emptied. Walls crumbled, fields lay fallow, And what remained were echoes, patterns in stone, fragments of pottery, terraces reclaimed by earth. Their fall was not sudden, but gradual, like mist dissipating as the sun climbs. But their influence endured, absorbed into the cultures that followed, remembered in the ways fields were farmed, in the designs woven into cloth, in the roads that later became part of the Inca's great network. Pause here for a moment. Picture the still waters of Lake Titicaca at dusk, reflecting the fading glow of the sky along its shores. Stones of Tiwanaku lie weathered but dignified, their carvings soft yet persistent. Far away, in the highlands of Wari, the outline of old walls can still be traced against the hills. These are not ruins of silence. They are quiet teachers. They remind us that civilizations do not simply vanish. They leave whispers in the stones, seeds in the soil, echoes in the breath of those who come after. And so, as we move forward, we carry with us the memory of the Wari and Tiwanaku not as lost empires, but as calm architects of Andean life, whose patterns remain woven into the fabric of the mountains. Long before the Inca Empire carved its vast network of highways across mountains and valleys, the Andes were already threaded with quiet paths. These were not always broad or paved, nor marked by walls or stones, yet they carried the same essence: connection. Roads in the Andes were never only about movement. They were lines of life, lines of meaning, lines of prayer. Imagine a narrow trail, worn by generations of feet, winding its way up a steep ridge. To one side, cliffs fall away into mist. To the other, slopes climb upward to snowy peaks. A line of travelers moves slowly, a shepherd guiding llamas laden with bundles, a farmer carrying maize, a pilgrim holding a small offering wrapped in cloth. The trail is silent except for the crunch of footsteps, the occasional call to an animal, and the steady hum of wind. These early roads were sacred as much as practical. They connected valleys to valleys, lakes to rivers, coasts to highlands. But they also connected people to gods' shrines and places of power. Some trails led to springs that were worshipped, others to rocky outcrops where offerings were made, still others to distant centers like Chavin or Tiwanaku. Walking a road in the Andes was never just travel, it was participation in a landscape alive with presence. The Wari and Tiwanaku built upon these trails, strengthening them, extending them, making them threads of culture as well as commerce. Along their routes rose small settlements, storehouses, and way stations where travelers could rest. Roads became arteries through which not only goods flowed, but also songs, stories, textiles, ideas, and beliefs. A pottery style born in one valley might be carried 100 kilometers away, becoming familiar to strangers who, after a long journey, suddenly recognized a pattern they had never seen before. And so the road itself became a kind of memory, storing within it the imprints of countless lives. Each footprint left behind was a quiet echo, one step in a chain stretching back generations. Think of the stars overhead, the Milky Way arching across the thin mountain sky. To the people of the Andes, the stars themselves were a road. Mayu, the celestial river mirrored by the earthly rivers below. To walk a trail on earth was to walk a reflection of the heavens. The roads tied not only people to one another, but earth to sky, body to spirit, human life to cosmic order. Even today, remnants of these ancient roads can be traced, sometimes nothing more than faint lines in the landscape, almost swallowed by grass or rock. Yet they endure. Shepherds still guide animals along them. Pilgrims still walk their routes during festivals. Hikers trace their curves, sometimes without knowing they are following footsteps thousands of years old. The roads remain, not because they were carved deep, but because they were walked faithfully again and again, until they became part of the earth itself. Pause for a moment and imagine yourself on such a road. The air is cool, the path narrow. Behind you lies a valley with terraced fields, ahead a distant ridge where the trail disappears into cloud. You are not alone. Invisible beside you walk countless others from centuries past, carrying goods, stories, prayers. Every step you take is in rhythm with theirs. The road is not empty. It is alive, filled with quiet echoes of lives long gone, yet somehow still present. These sacred roads remind us that the Andes were never isolated. Even before the Inca created their empire, the mountains were connected by paths of stone, soil, and spirit. To walk them was to belong to something larger, a great web that tied people not only to each other but to the vast breathing presence of the Andes themselves. History often describes empires as if they appear suddenly, as though a banner is raised, a king is crowned, and a realm is born in an instant. But in truth, the Inca did not emerge all at once. They grew slowly, quietly, like a river beginning as trickles of meltwater high in the glaciers, gathering strength as it winds downward. The birth of the Inca realm is less a story of conquest and more a story of patient roots spreading, of valleys bound together, of legends layered upon stone. At the heart of this story lies the valley of Cusco, a fertile basin embraced by mountains. Before the Incas, others lived here, small communities tending fields, raising llamas, weaving cloth, and walking the sacred roads that connected one valley to another. Into this landscape came a people who called themselves the Quechua, who would in time become the Incas. Legends say they were led by the children of the sun, sent from the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca to find a place where their golden staff would sink easily into the earth. They wandered valleys and ridges, testing soil, listening to the whispers of mountains, until they reached Cusco. There, the staff slid into the ground with ease, and they knew the gods had chosen their home, whether legend or memory. This story carries a truth. Cusco's valley was destined to be more than a village. It would be the navel of the world, the quiet center from which an empire would grow. At first, the Inca were but one among many small groups, neither the strongest nor the most numerous. Their power was modest, their reach local. They built terraces, tended fields, worshipped the mountains, and offered prayers to the sun. They learned from neighbors, traded along the ancient roads, and slowly, with patience, wove alliances. Where force failed, diplomacy worked. Where diplomacy failed, patience endured. Picture an early settlement in Cusco's valley, stone houses with thatched roofs clustered near fields of maize and potato. Children chase llamas, their laughter carried on the wind. Women weave by the doorway, their fingers working bright threads into patterns of red, black, and yellow. Men return from fields with harvests, pausing to rest by a stream whose waters run cold and clear from the mountains. Overhead, the sun watches, steady and unblinking, its warmth both life and God. The Incas saw themselves not as separate from the world around them, but as part of a great order. The sun was their father, the moon their mother, the mountains their guardians, the rivers their lifeblood. This worldview gave them patience and purpose, for to expand their realm was not only human ambition but divine duty, the spreading of order across the scattered valleys, the uniting of people beneath the sky's eternal rhythm. Little by little, their influence spread outward from Cusco. They learned the art of organizing labor, gathering neighbors to build terraces, dig canals, and raise small temples. They developed the beginnings of a system that would become Mita, communal service for the good of all. Each effort strengthened bonds, each project tied families and villages closer to Cusco. The Incas grew not by sudden conquest but by weaving strands into a stronger fabric, a tapestry stretching ever wider across the mountains. And so, when later chroniclers would write of the mighty Inca Empire, they often began with great rulers and vast armies. But beneath those loud chapters lies this quieter beginning, a valley, a staff sinking into fertile soil, a small people who believed the sun had chosen them. Their story reminds us that even the greatest empires are born humbly, from whispered prayers and shared labor, from patient roots in the earth. Pause here, on a quiet evening in Cusco's valley, The last light of the sun glows on the snowy peaks above, while shadows gather in the terraces below. Families sit by fires, weaving stories into the night. Children drift to sleep, hearing of gods and mountains, of journeys yet to come. In their dreams lies the shape of a realm not yet imagined, a realm that will one day stretch across mountains and deserts, carrying the echoes of the Andes farther than ever before. Every great civilization has its center, a place where the threads of culture, politics, and belief are drawn together, woven tightly, and then spread outward into the world. For the Inca, that place was Cusco, nestled in a fertile valley, guarded by mountains, and fed by rivers. Cusco was more than a capital. It was the navel of the world, the still point in the turning wheel of empire, the calm heart of stone from which all lines radiated. When you picture Cusco in its earliest days, do not imagine the bustling city of today, with plazas filled with visitors and streets alive with traffic. Instead, imagine a simpler scene. Stone houses with thatched roofs cluster in neighborhoods, each with small courtyards where weaving, cooking, and storytelling take place. Children run barefoot, their voices echoing against the hillsides. Farmers walk down narrow paths carrying maize and potatoes, their llamas tied together in long, quiet lines. The air is crisp, the sky vast, and above the city rise the watchful mountains, guardians older than memory. As the Inca realm grew, Cusco transformed from a village into a city of design and power. Its streets were not arranged haphazardly but shaped with deliberate meaning. According to Inca tradition, Cusco itself was designed in the form of a puma, sacred animal of strength. The head was the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, its body the winding streets, its tail the confluence of rivers. To walk through Cusco was to walk through a living symbol, a city not just of stone but of belief. At its center lay the Coricancha, the temple of the sun. Its walls were built of stones so finely cut that no blade could slide between them. When the sun rose, its light fell directly upon the temple, filling it with golden brilliance. Inside, offerings of gold and silver, precious textiles, and sacred objects reflected the glory of Inti, the sun god, who was the Inca's divine father. Pilgrims from across the empire would eventually travel to Cusco to see this temple, to bring gifts, and to stand within the navel of the world itself. But Cusco was not only a place of worship, it was also a place of governance, where decisions for the realm were made, where emissaries from distant provinces came to present their tribute. Here roads converged carrying goods from valleys, deserts, and coasts. Farmers brought maize and potatoes, shepherds offered wool, artisans presented textiles, metals, and pottery. In return, Cusco gave structure, unity, and order. Yet for all its role in empire, Cusco remained deeply human. In the evenings, fires flickered outside homes, where families gathered to eat and speak of their day. Musicians played flutes and drums, their rhythms weaving into the night air. Priests and storytellers reminded listeners of their divine origins, of the mountains that watched them, of the sun that never failed to rise. The city, for all its grandeur, still beat with the quiet rhythm of daily life. To imagine Cusco at its height is to imagine both stone and silence, streets paved and swept clean, walls rising in perfect lines, temples glowing in sunlight, yet also the sound of feet, the hush of prayer, the low hum of wind through alleyways. Cusco was not loud like other centers of power in history. Its strength lay in its stillness, its design, its sense of being at the center of all things. Even after the fall of the Inca, Cusco's heart remained. Conquerors built churches atop temples, new streets across old ones, but the stones endured. To walk in Cusco today is to walk on layers of time, to feel the echo of footsteps long faded, to see the calm resilience of stone that was cut and placed by hands devoted to both earth and sky. So let us pause here, within the navel of the world. Let us feel the quiet pulse of Cusco, its streets leading outward like veins, its temples glowing with sunlight, its mountains watching silently above. For this was not only the capital of an empire, it was the calm heart of stone, the stillness, at the center of the Andes, high above the Urubamba River, wrapped in the folds of cloud and jungle, lies a place that feels less like a ruin and more like a dream. Machu Picchu, often called the lost city of the Incas, rests on a ridge where stone, sky, and mist weave together in quiet harmony. To approach it is to step not only into history but into a landscape that seems to exist outside of time itself. Imagine first the climb. Paths wind upward through steep slopes, the air growing thinner with every step. The mountains rise like green giants, their ridges shrouded in drifting veils of mist. Below, the river curls in endless loops, its sound faint but constant, like a deep voice murmuring from the earth. And then, suddenly, the ridge opens, and the stones appear, terraces climbing the hillside, walls fitting seamlessly into the contours of the mountain, buildings aligned with stars and solstices. Machu Picchu reveals itself slowly like a secret whispered only when the clouds decide to part. Built in the mid-15th century, during the reign of Pachacuti, Machu Picchu was never a sprawling city but rather a carefully designed sanctuary. Some believe it was a royal retreat, a place of rest and ceremony for the Inca ruler and his entourage. Others see it as a sacred site, aligned with cosmic patterns, a place where rituals tied the empire to the heavens, whatever its exact purpose. Its construction shows the same devotion to stone and order that shaped all of Cusco and beyond. Look closer at the terraces, rising step by step along the mountainside. They are not only beautiful but practical, holding soil in place, capturing water, turning steep slopes into fields of life. The buildings, temples, houses, storage rooms, are crafted with stone so carefully cut that centuries of rain and earthquakes have not loosened them. In the Temple of the Sun, windows align with the solstice, catching the first light of dawn as if to remind all who gathered there that the Inca realm was bound not just to the earth, but to the cosmos. And yet, what makes Machu Picchu so powerful is not only its engineering but its setting. Mist drifts constantly curling around terraces, hiding peaks, then unveiling them again. Sunlight breaks through in sudden bursts, lighting walls of stone and golden glow before fading back into shadow. The mountains around it, Huayna Picchu, Putacusi, and others, rise like sentinels, their slopes cloaked in forest, their peaks sharp against the sky. It is as though the city was never meant to dominate the landscape, but to be part of it, to echo its quiet majesty. Life here, though elevated and rarefied, was still human. Families tended small plots, priests offered rituals, children played among the terraces, llamas grazed peacefully, their soft forms moving through fields that today lie silent. Fires glowed at night, their smoke drifting upward to join the stars. And above all, the mountains watched, as they had always done, as they still do for centuries. Machu Picchu lay hidden, abandoned after the fall of the Inca Empire, swallowed by vegetation, forgotten by the wider world but not by the local people, who still carried stories of its stones. When it was revealed to outsiders in the early 20th century, it was described as a discovery, but in truth, it had never disappeared. It had always been there, quiet, patient, breathing with the mountains. To stand at Machu Picchu today is to feel that patience. You look across the terraces, watch clouds drift, hear the call of a bird echoing through the mist. You feel the presence of lives once lived here, their echoes still woven into the stones. The city is not loud with history. It is gentle, dreamlike, as though the mountains themselves built it from silence. Pause here at the edge of a terrace, overlooking the Urubamba far below. Mist curls around your shoulders. Cool and soft, stones rise behind you, fitted with care by hands long gone. The peaks stand eternal, their slopes wrapped in cloud. In this stillness, you understand why Machu Picchu has become a symbol of the Andes, not only for its architecture, but for the quiet way it breathes with the earth. Among all the deities that filled the Inca world, none shone more brightly than Inti, the sun god. To the Inca, the sun was not only light and warmth but life itself. The great power that ripened maize, nourished potatoes, and illuminated the mountains where gods and ancestors dwelled. Every terrace, every harvest, every breath was tied to his golden presence. And so, the rituals and offerings made to Inti were not optional duties but essential rhythms of life, quiet acts of gratitude woven into the turning of the seasons. Picture dawn in Cusco, the heart of the empire. The air is cold, the sky painted, pale with first light. Priests in fine woven garments stand before the Coricancha, the temple of the sun, its walls once covered with golden plates that blazed when the morning rays touched them. As the first shaft of sunlight spills over the mountains and strikes the temple walls, voices rise in low chant. Drums beat softly, flutes hum, and offerings are lifted high, bowls of maize beer. Bright textiles, small carved figures of gold and silver. The city holds its breath, watching, waiting for Inti to accept their devotion. The Inca calendar revolved around such ceremonies, each solstice, each equinox. Each key moment in the cycle of planting and harvest was marked with rituals that tied human life to cosmic order. In June, during the winter solstice, came the Inti Raymi, the great festival of the sun. Fires were extinguished across the empire, plunging communities into symbolic darkness. Then, as priests kindled new fire from the focused rays of the sun, warmth and light were reborn, carried back to every hearth. For days, there were processions, offerings, and feasts, not noisy, chaotic celebrations, but solemn, measured, woven with prayer and rhythm. Offerings to Inti and other deities were made in many forms. Maize beer, known as chicha, was poured onto the earth, soaking into the soil as though feeding the mountains themselves. Coca leaves, sacred and energizing, were offered in bundles, carried by wind or water to the spirits. Llamas, gentle companions of the highlands, were sometimes sacrificed, their lives given as gifts to ensure the fertility of fields and the balance of the cosmos. Gold and silver objects, crafted with exquisite care, were placed in shrines or buried in sacred sites, not as treasure for humans to hoard, but as gifts returned to the gods. Yet ritual was not limited to great ceremonies in Cusco. In villages across the Andes, families performed smaller offerings each day. Before planting seeds, they sprinkled maize or poured water onto the ground. Before a journey, they whispered words to the mountains, leaving coca leaves in a crack of stone. At meals, they tipped the first sip of chicha onto the earth before drinking, a gesture of gratitude that reminded them of their place within the wider order of life. The mountains themselves, the Apis, were central to these offerings. Each peak was alive, a guardian spirit who watched over the valleys below. To travel through the Andes was to pass constantly beneath their gaze, and each required respect. Small cairns of stone, called apaches, still stand along trails where travelers stop to place a rock, a coca leaf, or a whispered prayer. In these simple acts, the Andes themselves were fed, and in return, they gave protection. Imagine standing on a high ridge at dawn, the world still wrapped in shadow. A priest lifts his arms toward the rising sun, his breath visible in the cold air. Around him, people kneel silent, waiting. The first rays touch the snowy peaks, then the terraces, then the faces of the gathered crowd. A murmur of gratitude spreads, not loud but steady, heartfelt. The sun has returned, as it always does, and life will continue. These rituals remind us that the Inca did not see themselves as rulers of the earth, but as part of its breath, dependent upon its gifts. To offer, to sacrifice, to give back was not superstition, it was balance. It was acknowledgement that no harvest, no road, no empire could endure without the steady warmth of the sun, without the patience of the mountains, without the endless cycles of nature. Pause here in the silence after the chants fade. The air is still, the sunlight warm on your face. The offerings lie upon the ground, simple and sacred. Our new families return to their homes, priests to their temples, children to their games. The ritual has ended, but its meaning endures. Life is a gift, and every day is a chance to return that gift with gratitude. In the high Andes, where the air is thin and nights are sharper than the day, the sky reveals itself with a brilliance rarely seen elsewhere. Stars glimmer like beads stitched into a vast cloak of darkness, and the Milky Way spills across the heavens like a silver river. For the Inca, and for the generations who came before them, these stars were not distant or abstract. They were companions, guides, and teachers. They were part of a calendar written in light, a calendar that marked time as surely as any stone or quipu. The Andean calendar was not measured in pages or parchment but in cycles of sun, moon, stars, and seasons. Farmers needed to know when to plant maize, when to harvest potatoes, when to prepare terraces and canals for the shifting rains. Priests needed to know when to perform rituals, when to honor the gods with offerings, when to call the people together for festivals. The sky became their clock, their map, their silent book. The solstices were the anchors of this celestial order. In June, when the sun reached its lowest point in the sky, the people celebrated Inti Raymi, the rebirth of the sun. In December, when the sun returned to its height, they gave thanks for warmth and abundance. Each solstice was not only a marker of time but a sacred turning of the wheel, a reminder that life itself was a rhythm, moving endlessly between light and darkness, growth and rest. The Pleiades, a small cluster of stars, were especially important. When they first rose clearly in the night sky, it was a sign that the planting season had begun. If the stars appeared bright and sharp, the coming harvest would be strong. If they seemed dim, clouds suggested rains would be weak, and farmers prepared for scarcity. In this way, the heavens spoke directly to the people, whispering forecasts of their survival. But the Inca did not only see figures in the stars, they also saw shapes in the dark spaces between them. The Milky Way for them was a great river called the Mayu, mirrored by the rivers of the earth. Within its dark patches lived sacred animals, a llama, a fox, a serpent, a toad. These creatures were not imagined but revealed, their shadows written across the glowing band of stars. To lie on the ground at night and gaze upward was to see both a reflection of daily life and a reminder that the cosmos itself held the same beings, the same rhythms, as the valleys below on high regions. Priests and sky watchers built stone pillars and observatories. These were not for idle stargazing but for careful alignment, marking the movements of sun and stars with precision. From Cusco, lines of sight connected mountains and temples with celestial events, tying earth to sky. When the sun rose between certain peaks at dawn, it marked the change of season. When the moon drifted across the heavens, it guided the timing of rituals. Each motion in the sky was part of the great fabric in which all life was woven. Imagine an Andean night far from the fires of a city. Families gather outside their homes, wrapped in woven blankets, watching the stars rise. An elder points with a slow hand, tracing the shape of the dark llama in the Milky Way, telling how it drinks from the river in the sky and how its health ensures the health of llamas on earth. Children listen with wide eyes, their breaths fogging in the cold air. The stars above seem close enough to touch, and the world feels whole, every being tied together by light and darkness. The calendar was not only practical, not only spiritual, it was both. Inseparably, in the Andes, no line divided the sacred from the everyday. To plant maize was to honor the sun, to harvest potatoes was to thank the earth, to gaze at stars was to listen to the gods. Every act of life moved within cycles, and every cycle found its reflection in the quiet stars above. Today, when travelers look up at the Andean sky, they often feel at its clarity. Yet for those who lived here centuries ago, All was accompanied by intimacy. The stars were not only beautiful, they were guides, ancestors, beings. To walk beneath them was to walk beneath a canopy alive with presence. So let us pause here beneath this eternal night. The mountains are dark silhouettes against the glowing river of stars. The Milky Way curves above like a silver path, mirrored. In the waters below, you sit wrapped in warmth, breathing slowly, listening to an elder's voice. The stars are not silent at all. They are speaking patiently, as they always have, as they always will. High in the Andes, where the slopes are steep and the soil often slides away with rain, the land itself seemed to resist farming. Yet the people of the mountains did not turn back. Instead, they reshaped the earth with patience, crafting it into steps that climbed the hillsides like green ladders reaching for the sky. These were the terraces or Andes, and they remain among the most enduring achievements of Andean civilization. To imagine them, picture a mountainside wrapped in mist. Instead of bare slopes, the hills are carved into rows of flat fields, each one supported by stone walls. From afar, they look like the folds of a giant blanket laid across the land, curving with the natural shape of the mountain. In the morning light, the terraces glow softly, their edges traced with dew, llamas grazing on the upper levels, while farmers bend over their crops below. The genius of terraces lay in their harmony with nature. On steep ground where rain might wash soil away, the stone walls held it steady. Where the sun beat harshly during the day but frost crept in at night, terraces balanced temperatures, storing warmth in the stones. Where water might otherwise rush down slopes, canals carried it gently across levels, nourishing each field before it trickled into the next. The mountain, once resistant, became a partner in growth. On these terraces, life unfolded. Potatoes, in hundreds of varieties, thrived in the thin mountain soil. Maize stretched its golden stalks where conditions allowed. Quinoa, small but resilient, fed communities when other crops failed. Families worked side by side, their hands planting seeds carefully, their eyes on the sky, their prayers whispered to the mountains and the sun. The terraces were not only fields, they were altars, each one a place where earth and human effort met in quiet agreement. Walking among them, you would hear the sounds of a community at work, the scrape of tools against soil, the soft bleating of llamas carrying loads of harvest, the laughter of children chasing one another along the stone walls. Women wove baskets to carry produce, men guided water through channels with simple but precise movements, elders supervised with calm eyes, recalling lessons passed down through generations. Every stone set, every seed pressed into the soil carried with it the memory of ancestors who had done the same. Terraces were not isolated patches of farmland. Together, they formed networks that stretched across valleys, linking villages and families in shared labor. One household might tend fields near their home, while others helped on distant slopes, bound together by reciprocity. The Andean principle of any mutual aid meant that no one labored entirely alone. The land itself, shaped by many hands, reflected the bonds of community as much as the skill of engineering. From above, on a clear day, terraces appear like fingerprints upon the mountains, unique, intricate, enduring. They remind us that survival in the Andes was not about conquering nature but about listening to it, shaping it gently, finding balance within its challenges. Each terrace was both practical and poetic, a quiet statement that human life could thrive even where the earth seemed unyielding. Even now, centuries after the fall of the Inca, many terraces remain in use. Farmers still plant potatoes on them, still guide water through their channels, still walk the same stone steps their ancestors carved. The mist still curls over them at dawn, the sun still warms their walls at noon. The stars still shine above them at night. They are living echoes, not relics, carrying the breath of past centuries into the present. Pause here for a moment. Picture yourself standing on a high terrace, clouds drifting just below, so that you feel as though you are suspended between earth and sky. Around you, the mountains rise in silence, their slopes patterned with stone and soil. The air is thin, but fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth. You hear the quiet trickle of water moving through a channel, the distant call of a bird, the hum of life continuing as it always has done here. Above the clouds, the terraces speak not of struggle but of harmony. They are the patient work of generations, carved not for glory or monuments, but for life itself. They are the proof that civilization can be gentle, that survival can be an art as much as a necessity, and that the quiet work of many hands can leave patterns more lasting than stone palaces or golden treasures. In the high silence of the Andes, where fields climb toward the sky and air grows thin, human life was never lived alone. Beside the people walked animals that were more than livestock, more than burden bearers. They were companions, woven into daily rhythm and sacred story alike. The llama and the alpaca were quiet presences in Andean life, patient, steady, enduring, and without them, the great civilizations of these mountains might never have flourished. Picture an early morning. In a terraced valley, mist curls low, the sun just beginning to warm the frost. The shepherd, wrapped in a thick woven cloak, walks slowly along a narrow path, llamas trailing behind him in calm procession. Each animal carries bundles tied with bright cloth, their long necks swaying, their dark eyes watchful but gentle. Few alpacas graze near the terraces, their wool thick and soft, catching the first light like a halo. Together, man and animals move as one, a rhythm of footsteps and breath that has echoed across these mountains for centuries. The llama was the Andean caravan, strong and sure-footed. It carried loads of maize, potatoes, textiles, or stones across steep trails where no wheeled cart could ever pass. In long lines, caravans of llamas moved silently from valley to valley, their bells tinkling softly, their herders humming songs that blended with the wind. They did not hurry, their pace was steady, measured, as if in tune with the slow breath of the mountains themselves. The alpaca, smaller and gentler, gave its gift in wool, soft, warm, and fine. It was woven into blankets and tunics that shielded families from the cold. The most prized alpaca wool was reserved for nobility and for offerings to the gods, its shimmering threads carrying both warmth and sacred meaning. To spin alpaca wool was not only work but art, each thread carrying patience, each pattern carrying story. Both animals were also part of the spiritual fabric of the Andes. In myths, llamas could sense danger, warning people of floods or earthquakes. In rituals, llamas were sometimes offered to the gods, their lives given as gifts to ensure the fertility of fields, the balance of seasons. Yet even in sacrifice, they were honored, draped in fine cloth, treated as messengers to the divine. The alpaca, too, was seen as a gift of the mountains, its wool a blessing as much as a resource. Children grew up among them, learning early how to guide, feed, and care for the herds. The bond between people and animals was one of mutual need, but also mutual familiarity. To walk through a village was to see llamas grazing nearby, alpacas huddled in small groups, their presence as natural and constant as stone walls or flowing streams. Pause and picture such a scene, a shepherd sitting on a hillside, flute in hand, while his llamas graze quietly around him. The notes drift into the thin air, mingling with the calls of distant birds and the rustle of grass. The animals lift their heads now and then, dark eyes reflecting the sky, before returning calmly to their grazing. There is no rush here, no loud demand, only the quiet companionship of beings who have walked these lands together for centuries. The llama and alpaca remind us that civilizations are not built by humans alone. They are shaped by relationships between people and earth, people and sky, people and animals. In their steady steps and soft wool, these creatures carried not just burdens and warmth, but the possibility of life itself in a land where survival required every form of harmony. Even today, when travelers climb into the Andes, they often find llamas and alpacas grazing near ruins, their forms moving softly against the backdrop of stone and mountain. They stand as living echoes, reminders that history is not only stone walls and golden temples, but also quiet companions with dark eyes and patient breath. Civilizations are often remembered for their temples, palaces, and empires, yet the true rhythm of Andean life was not found only in Cusco's plazas or Machu Picchu's terraces. It lived quietly in the mountain villages, scattered across ridges and valleys, where families tended fields, wove cloth, and built lives in harmony with the land. These villages were the heartbeat of the Andes, steady and enduring, as constant as the wind that moved through their streets. Imagine a village nestled against a slope, its stone houses clustered together like stones of a cairn. The roofs are thatched with ichu grass, golden in the sunlight, their edges soft against the sharp lines of mountains. Smoke drifts gently from chimneys as families begin their morning fires. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, while in the distance, llamas graze on terraced fields. Children laugh as they chase one another along narrow paths, their shouts echoing off the hillsides. Life here is not grand, but it is full. Each day in a mountain village followed the cycles of work and season. At dawn, men and women set out to the fields, guiding water into canals, planting seeds in carefully tended terraces, or harvesting maize and potatoes. Their tools were simple but effective, shaped from wood and stone, guided by centuries of practice. By midday, families gathered for a meal of potatoes, quinoa soup, or maize cakes, eaten together beneath the open sky. The afternoons were spent weaving, tending herds, or repairing walls and roofs, and when the sun dipped behind the peaks, the village gathered again around fires, around stories, around music that carried softly into the night. Weaving was at the heart of these communities. Women sat outside their homes, their fingers moving deftly over looms, creating textiles dyed with colors drawn from plants and minerals. Each pattern held meaning of family, of village, of mountain. A woven cloth was more than clothing, it was history, identity, and offering. To wrap oneself in such fabric was to carry generations of memory upon one's shoulders. Music, too, filled the air. Flutes carved from bone or wood, drums stretched with llama hide, and panpipes played in groups created melodies that echoed the mountains. These were not performances for applause, but rhythms for ritual, for celebration, for the steady marking of life's moments, a child's birth, a harvest success, a festival honoring the sun. The mountains were never absent from village life. Peaks loomed above, not only as stone but as apis, living guardians. Before planting, villagers offered coca leaves or maize beer to the earth, asking the apis to watch over their crops. Before journeys, they placed stones upon cairns at mountain passes, whispering words of thanks and protection. To live in a village was to live always in conversation with the land, listening for its needs, responding with care. Evenings brought a calm that feels timeless. Fires flickered within courtyards. Families huddled together for warmth. Elders told stories of gods, heroes, and ancestors, their voices steady, their words weaving memory into the fabric of night. Children leaned against their mothers' shoulders, drifting to sleep beneath the glow of firelight, the stars above, and the hum of wind through grass. The village was small, but within its walls, the whole cosmos seemed to gather: earth, sky, people, animals, all tied together in quiet unity. These villages, though humble, were the foundation upon which the great Inca realm was built. Without their fields, there would be no harvests. Without their weavers, no textiles to clothe nobles and priests. Without their shepherds, no caravans to carry goods across mountains. They were the quiet engines of empire, sustaining not only Cusco's splendor but the daily rhythm of millions. Today, many such villages still exist. Stone houses still cluster against slopes, Terraces still rise up hillsides. Fires still glow at dusk. Travelers who wander into them often feel as though they have stepped back in time, into a slower, gentler rhythm where survival and beauty are intertwined. The mountains still watch. The rivers still flow and life continues much as it always has, simple, resilient, calm. Pause here for a moment. Picture yourself seated by a village fire as dusk falls. The air is cool, but the warmth of the flames reaches your hands. Around you, children laugh, women weave. Men speak of tomorrow's work. The stars above are sharp and clear. The mountains silent and eternal. The world feels small and vast at once, a village heart beating within the great body of the Andes. If the mountains of the Andes breathe with wind and stone, then their people have always answered with music. It is not the music of crowded halls or grand orchestras, but the music of valleys and ridges, of shepherds on lonely trails, of villages gathered at dusk. It is music woven from silence itself, shaped by the rhythm of footsteps, the call of birds, and the whisper of rivers. The flute, carved from cane, wood, or bone, carried the voice of the wind. High and clear, its notes rose into the thin air, drifting across terraces and slopes, echoing against cliffs until they became part of the landscape. Shepherds carried flutes as companions, playing while their llamas grazed, their melodies blending with the quiet of the day. Each phrase was simple, repeated, patient, not meant to impress but to soothe, to accompany the slow passage of hours. The panpipe, or zampoga, held a deeper mystery. Made of reeds bound together, its multiple pipes created harmonies when played in pairs or groups. Two musicians might face one another, each with a set of pipes, their melodies incomplete without the other. Together, they wove a song that belonged not to a single person, but to the bond between them. The music of the zampoga was thus not only sound but relationship, a dialogue as gentle and enduring as friendship itself. Drums, stretched with the hides of llamas or alpacas, gave rhythm to festivals and rituals. Their low, steady thrum was the heartbeat of ceremonies, guiding dancers, marking time, reminding all present of the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. When paired with flutes and pipes, the drum sound anchored melody to body, bringing the heavens and the soil together in rhythm. But perhaps most striking was the way silence wove itself into Andean music. The thin air of the mountains carried sound differently. Every note traveled far, lingering, resonating against slopes and valleys. Between notes, silence was not emptiness, but presence, the sound of wind, the cry of a condor, the trickle of water, the quiet of snow upon peaks. Musicians did not seek to fill silence, but to converse with it, to shape their melodies around it, as though silence itself was the oldest instrument of all. Music was not separate from daily life. Children learned songs from elders as naturally as they learned to weave or plant. Work in the fields was accompanied by rhythm, songs to guide planting, to lighten labor, to celebrate harvest. Ceremonies for the sun, the moon, or the apis were marked by music, with flutes carrying prayers upward, drums grounding them in earth. Even journeys along sacred roads were often walked with song, footsteps falling in time with melodies carried softly on the air. Imagine, for a moment, a festival in a mountain village. The sun has dipped behind peaks, and fires burn in the square. Men play zamponas in pairs, their melodies weaving and overlapping, like rivers joining. Women beat small drums, steady and calm, their rhythms mingling with laughter and dancing. Footsteps, children clap along, their voices rising in chorus. Overhead, the stars emerge, their slow glow mirroring the music below. The sound is not overwhelming, not loud, but it fills the valley with warmth, binding everyone in its gentle spell. Even in solitude, music accompanied life. A lone shepherd on a ridge lifts a flute, his melody carried by the wind. A woman hums while weaving, her song keeping rhythm with her shuttle. A child plays with a reed pipe, imitating elders. Music was not a separate act, it was woven into the fabric of living. as essential as breath. Today, the echoes remain. Travelers walking through the Andes still hear flutes drifting across fields, panpipes played in villages, drums at festivals. The sound is ancient yet alive, unchanged yet ever new. Each note carries the memory of centuries, the voice of ancestors, the breath of mountains. Pause here, in the quiet after a song. The fire is low, the stars above bright. The last note of a flute lingers, then fades into silence. And yet the silence itself feels full alive, as though the mountains are listening. In this stillness, you understand, the Andes have always been singing, and their people have always known how to listen. In the Andes, stone is everywhere. It rises in the mountains, crumbles along ridges, lies scattered in valleys, and watches silently from cliffs. To live in such a land meant not resisting stone but learning its language. And so the Andean peoples, and most profoundly the Inca, became masters of stonework, not through brute force, but through patience, precision, and harmony with the material itself. Imagine walking along a street in Cusco or through the ruins of Sacsayhuaman. Walls rise on either side, stones fitted together so perfectly that not even a blade of grass can slide between them. No mortar binds them. No metal tools cut them with ease. Instead, each stone was shaped carefully, its edges tested again and again until it nestled seamlessly against its neighbors. Large or small, smooth or angled, each stone found its place, and together they formed walls that have endured centuries of earthquakes and storms. The Inca did not see stone as lifeless matter. Each block was part of a living earth, to be respected and persuaded rather than forced. Workers used hammerstones and tools of harder rock to chip away patiently. They studied the natural shape of each stone, listening to its lines, turning it until it revealed the form it wished to take. The process was slow, quiet, and deliberate, more like a conversation than a command. Consider the massive stones at Sacsayhuaman, some weighing over 100 tons, yet lifted and set into place without wheels or beasts of burden. They were moved by human hands, ropes, ramps, and endless patience. There was no rush, no attempt to outpace the mountain. The stones arrived as they were ready, and once set, they remained as though rooted to the earth itself. Their stability was not in their weight alone but in their fitting, a harmony of angles and curves that locked together like pieces of a vast puzzle. Stone was not only used for fortresses and walls. It shaped homes, canals, temples, and terraces. Water channels carved from single blocks guided streams gently through cities. Staircases, smoothed by centuries of footsteps, rose between levels. Sacred stones, carved with niches or figures, served as places of prayer and offering. Every element of daily life carried the touch of stone, not as cold hardness but as enduring presence. The artistry of Inca stonework was also deeply spiritual. Stones were often aligned with mountains, rivers, or celestial events. A temple window might frame the rising sun at solstice. A wall might mirror the slope of a nearby peak. Stones became mediators between human life and cosmic order, shaping spaces where earth, sky, and spirit could meet. Pause for a moment and picture a craftsman at work centuries ago. He kneels before a stone, tapping gently with a hammerstone, then stepping back to study its shape. On him, others do the same, voices low, tools striking in steady rhythm. There is no clamor, no frantic rush, only the quiet persistence of many hands, shaping the immovable through patience. When at last the stone fits into its place, the wall feels less like construction and more like a living being, whole and complete. Even today, travelers who place their hands against Inca walls often feel something uncanny, a sense of strength, of balance, of permanence. These stones have stood while kingdoms rose and fell, while centuries turned, while storms raged and earthquakes shook the earth. They remain, whispering of the hands that shaped them, of the quiet dialogue between human and mountain. The stonework of the Andes teaches us that strength need not be loud. It can be found in patience, in precision, in the quiet joining of many parts into a harmonious whole. It endures not through force, but through balance. In this way, every wall, every terrace, every temple becomes more than architecture. It becomes a lesson in how to live within a world of stone and sky. Not all histories are written in ink, not all memories are carved in stone. In the high Andes, where mountains stretch like endless pages, the Incas and their ancestors wove their records into threads. These were the quipu, cords and knots, strings of fiber carrying meaning without words, silent yet eloquent, humble yet powerful. They were not scrolls to be read with eyes alone, but languages to be felt with fingers, to be remembered in rhythm, to be recited aloud in the company of others. A quipu began with a single cord, usually of cotton or alpaca wool, dyed in colors both subtle and bright. From this central strand hung other cords, each one carrying its own knots, its own arrangement. Some cords were brown or black, others red or yellow, still others blue or green. The placement of a knot, the number of turns, the twist of the fiber, all were part of its meaning. To one untrained, it might look like nothing more than strands of thread, but to the Quipicameac, the keeper of knots, it was a library, a map, a story. The quipu could record numbers, the count of llamas in a herd, the measure of maize in a storehouse, the tribute owed from one valley to another, by moving fingers along knots. The Quipicameac could speak aloud the totals, recalling not only the numbers themselves, but their significance. In this way, quipus were the heartbeat of administration, carrying the pulse of empire through cords and knots instead of ink and parchment. Yet the quipu may have held more than numbers. Some scholars believed they carried stories, genealogies, even poetry, not in letters but in patterns, in a coat of knots and colors understood by those trained to read them. Imagine a line of cords telling the ancestry of a family, each knot marking a generation, each color marking a lineage. Or, picture a quipu recording a festival, the sequence of rituals tied into knots, preserved for memory and retelling. Though much of this knowledge has faded, the possibility lingers like a whisper in the threads. Pause for a moment and picture a Quipicameac at work. He sits cross-legged in a courtyard, the cords spread across his lap. Children watch in silence, curious but reverent. His fingers move with care, tightening a knot here, loosening another, checking the order of colors. His lips move softly, reciting what the knots contain, the tribute of maize from a distant village, the llamas born this year, the festivals yet to come. To those who listen, the cords are alive, their silence filled with memory. The beauty of the quipu was not in its permanence, but in its adaptability. Unlike stone inscriptions that remain fixed, the quipu could be untied, altered, expanded. It grew with life itself, changing as seasons and needs demanded. It was not a rigid archive but a living record, breathing with the rhythm of the people who used it. When the Spanish arrived, they saw quipus but could not understand them. To their eyes, writing had to be letters on a page carved into permanence. They dismissed the cords as primitive, failing to see the wisdom woven into their threads. Many quipus were destroyed, their secrets lost, and yet some remain, tucked away in collections, studied by those who still seek to hear their voices. Each quipu that survives is like a muted song waiting for someone to recall its melody. The quipu reminds us that memory does not belong only to ink or stone. It can be carried in thread, in rhythm, in the touch of fingers. It shows us that history can be quiet, flexible, woven into the fabric of life itself. And though the meaning of many quipus is silent now, their presence continues to whisper that there are always other ways to remember, other ways to tell, other ways to keep the echoes of a people alive. Pause here and imagine the feel of a quipu. In your hands, the wool is soft, the knots firm under your fingertips. Each one holds meaning, though you may not know it. You close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let your fingers move, as though tracing memory itself. In the silence, the cords hum softly, carrying stories across centuries, threads tying past to present, across the vast and rugged expanse of the Andes, from deserts baked by sun to valleys cloaked in green, from snow-capped ridges to coastal plains. The Inca wove one of the most remarkable networks of roads the world has ever known. It stretched for nearly 40,000 kilometers, binding together lands as varied as they were distant. Yet, unlike the bustling, noisy highways of later centuries, these roads were quiet threads carrying footsteps, whispers, and prayers across peaks. Imagine standing on a high ridge at dawn. Before you lies a narrow stone path, hugging the side of the mountain, dropping steeply into mist below. The road is barely wide enough for two people to pass, yet it feels solid. Each stone placed with care, far in the distance, it disappears into a fold of clouds, suggesting journeys unseen. Behind you, the trail winds back toward a valley, crossing rivers and terraces, vanishing into the horizon. You are standing upon a thread of empire, stretched across the backbone of a continent. The Chapacuan, as the road system was called, was not built overnight. It grew like the roots of a tree reaching outward from Cusco, the heart of the Inca realm. Smaller paths that had existed for centuries, trails used by Wari to Wanaco, and countless unnamed communities before them, were strengthened, straightened, and tied into a grand design. From valleys to deserts, from high peaks to coasts, the Inca gave order to the ancient pathways, weaving them into a network that mirrored the cosmic order they saw in the heavens. These roads were not only practical but sacred. They linked not just cities and villages, but also shrines, sacred mountains, and places of ritual. To walk them was not only to travel but to move along lines of meaning, connecting human life with divine geography. Along the roads stood tambos, way stations where travelers could rest, and colcas, storehouses filled with maize, potatoes, and dried meats. Messengers known as chasqui ran along them in relays, carrying quippus and messages with incredible speed, their footsteps beating quietly against the stones. The roads were built with astonishing skill. In some places, they were paved with stone, fitted as carefully as walls. In others, they were dirt paths edged with drainage ditches. Across rivers, the Inca built suspension bridges of woven grass, swaying yet strong, renewed each year by community effort. Along cliffs, they carved steps directly into the rock, narrow but steady, guiding travelers safely across sheer drops. Every element of the landscape was met with patience and ingenuity, shaped into a path rather than conquered. Imagine a caravan of llamas walking along one of these trails. Their bells tinkle softly, their hooves steady on the stones behind them. Herders carry woven packs of goods, maize from the low valleys, salt from high flats, fish dried on the coast, textiles dyed with mountain plants. The road is quiet, filled not with traffic but with rhythm, each step a continuation of countless steps before. Yet the roads were more than commerce. They carried people to festivals in Cusco, pilgrims to shrines high in the mountains, soldiers to distant provinces when called. They carried rituals, stories, and music, spreading culture like a soft wind through valleys. They were lines not only of stone but of memory, binding scattered communities into one fabric. Even today, remnants of the Chapacuan remain. Some are still walked daily by villagers, shepherds, and travelers. Some lie hidden under grass, their stones shifted but still in place. Others, especially the woven bridges, continue to be remade by communities, their fibers strong enough to hold footsteps, as they have for centuries. To step upon one of these paths today is to walk in rhythm with the past, to place your feet where countless others have walked, to feel the quiet endurance of empire. Pause here for a moment. Imagine yourself on such a trail, high above valleys, clouds drifting below. The silence is deep, broken only by the sound of your breath, the hum of wind, the occasional call of a bird. The road stretches ahead, calm and sure, carrying you forward. You realize it is not merely stone beneath your feet, but memory laid carefully, patiently, by hands that believed in the power of connection. The Inca road system endures as one of the greatest achievements of human history, not because it was loud or grand, but because it was steady, precise, and full of meaning. It remains a quiet thread across peaks, a reminder that even in the highest, harshest landscapes, people found ways not only to survive but to connect, to move, to belong. In the thin air of the Andes, where villages clung to terraces and valleys, life was often marked by work, planting, harvesting, weaving, herding. Yet life was never only toil. Throughout the year, the rhythm of the calendar was punctuated by festivals, times when entire communities gathered to honor gods, to celebrate the turning of the seasons, and to renew bonds of kinship. These were not noisy spectacles in the sense of modern parades, but rather steady, rhythmic events woven with prayer, music, dance, and offerings. They were moments when the Andes themselves seemed to join in quiet joy. Imagine a mountain village preparing for such a festival. In the days leading up to it, families cleaned their homes, sweep the village paths, and prepare food. Women dye textiles in bright reds, yellows, and blues, weaving garments that shimmer against the muted tones of stone and grass. Men brew chicha, the maize beer that will flow generously during the ceremonies, pouring the first sips upon the earth as offerings. Children watch with excitement, their eyes bright, sensing that the ordinary rhythm of life is about to shift into something sacred and communal. At dawn, the festival begins. A procession forms, moving slowly toward a sacred space, perhaps a plaza, perhaps a temple, perhaps a high field overlooking snowy peaks. Priests lead, carrying offerings of maize, coca leaves, or small golden figures. Behind them, villagers walk together, their clothes bright, their voices humming low songs that blend with the wind. The air smells of incense and smoke, of roasted maize, of earth warmed by sun. Music fills the space. Panpipes play in pairs, their melodies weaving back and forth like rivers joining. Drums mark the heartbeat of the crowd, steady and grounding. Flutes rise above, their notes carrying toward the mountains. Dancers move in circles, their steps measured, their motions imitating animals, the sun, the stars. Feathers, beads, and woven cloth shimmer as they turn. Each dance is not only art but offering, a way of giving movement back to the gods, of showing gratitude through the body itself. The festivals honored many deities: Inti, the sun, who gave light; Pachamama, the earth mother who gave food; the Apis, mountain spirits, who watched over villages; and countless local gods tied to springs, rivers, or stones. Offerings were made generously: food, drink, textiles, even llamas, all given with reverence. In these moments, the boundary between human and divine felt thin, as though the gods themselves walked among the people, accepting gifts and joining in joy. Yet festivals were not only for gods. They were also for people, for the strengthening of bonds. Communities gathered, shared meals, drank together, sang into the night. Stories were told, children learned traditions. Alliances between families were renewed. The festival was a reminder that survival in the Andes was never individual but collective. To thrive meant to share, to celebrate, to remember that every field, every terrace, every road belonged not to one person, but to the many. As night falls, fires flicker in the village square. Families sit close, wrapped in woven blankets, sipping the last of the chicha. Musicians play slower melodies now, flutes drifting into silence, drums beating gently like a fading heartbeat. Above, the stars shine sharp and countless, their light mirrored in the embers below. Children fall asleep in their mothers' arms, their dreams filled with music, color, and warmth. Festivals in the heights remind us that joy need not be loud. It can be slow, steady, and shared. It can rise in songs carried on thin air, in dances that echo the movements of the cosmos, in offerings that connect earth and sky. In the Andes, celebration was not escape from life but part of it. a way of affirming that even in the highest, harshest places, life could be beautiful, communal, and full of gratitude. Pause here. In the soft glow of firelight, the music is fading, the stars are bright, the village is calm, you feel the warmth of the community around you, the presence of the mountains above, the blessing of the gods in every breath. The festival is ending, but its joy lingers, like an echo carried gently on the wind. For centuries, the Andes lived in rhythms of their own making, cycles of planting and harvest, rituals for the sun and stars, roads that bound valleys to valleys, and festivals that brought life to quiet plazas. To those who walked the sacred roads and tended terraced fields, the world felt complete. Yet history has a way of carrying whispers across oceans, and in the 15th and 16th centuries, faint echoes from faraway lands began to reach even these high peaks. The first encounters were not ships upon coasts or soldiers on trails, but rumors. Traders and travelers moving along the vast Inca road system spoke of strangers on distant shores, people unlike any seen before, riding animals larger than llamas, wearing armor that gleamed like the sun, carrying weapons that thundered louder than drums. At first, these stories may have seemed like legends, the kind of tales elders told by firelight to warn or to amuse, but whispers grew, carried from village to village, and settling the calm order of the empire. In Cusco, the priests looked to the heavens for signs. Were these newcomers messengers of gods or threats sent by spirits displeased with offerings? The Quipicamex died new knots, recording unfamiliar names, uncertain numbers. Strange events unfolding far from the mountain heart of the Rhone. The Inca rulers weighed reports with patience, trying to fit these whispers into a world that had always been guided by cycles and balance. Imagine a quiet mountain village hearing of these strangers for the first time. Families gather around a fire as a traveler describes men who carry thunder in their hands and who arrive upon great floating houses on the sea. Faces turn toward the flames, eyes filled with wonder, doubt, and unease. Children shiver, clinging to their mothers. Elders shake their heads, murmuring that such things cannot be, that the mountains would never allow such chaos to cross their valleys, and yet the stories spread, undeniable in their persistence. When at last the strangers did appear in Andean lands, Spaniards led by Francisco Pizarro, they arrived not as whispers, but as shock. Horses thundered where only llamas had walked, swords clashed where stone and wood had sufficed. Languages unknown filled the air, their sounds sharp and alien against the soft cadences of Quechua. To the Andean people, these encounters were bewildering. Were these men gods? Were they envoys of Inti, or perhaps shadows of darker forces? The balance of the world seemed to tremble. Yet even in the face of such disruption, Andean calm endured. Villages continued their rituals, farmers continued planting, festivals continued marking the seasons. Life, at its heart, remained tied to mountains and stars, even as echoes of distant worlds pressed closer. In these moments, the Andes themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what change would come. Pause here. In this moment of tension, picture yourself in Cusco as rumors swirl. The plaza is quiet, but people whisper at its edges. Priests lift their faces to the sky, searching for omens. Children play still, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. The mountains stand, silent, their peaks glowing in the sun, as if to remind all who live here that no matter what arrives from beyond, the Andes themselves endure. The whispers of change remind us that history does not move in silence alone. Sometimes it shifts suddenly, bringing distant worlds crashing into one another. For the Andes, this encounter would bring challenges as immense as the mountains themselves. Yet the calm heart of their culture, their terraces, their rituals, their music, their quiet bonds with earth and sky would continue to echo long after the first thunder of foreign footsteps. The Andes had seen empires rise and fade before: the Chavan, the Wari, the Tiwanaku. Yet none had stretched so far or held such order as the Inca realm. Its terraces rose high above the valleys. Its roads bound mountains to deserts. Its quipas recorded the pulse of life across thousands of kilometers. To many, it must have seemed eternal, as steady as the sun that rose each morning over Cusco. But even empires that seem immovable can stumble. And the fall of the Inca came not like a single stone rolling downhill, but like a mountain shaken by 7 quakes. When the Spaniards arrived in the early 1500s, they found an empire already strained. The Inca ruler Huayna Capac had died, possibly from a sickness brought from distant lands. A sickness that swept through villages before the strangers themselves appeared. His death sparked a bitter struggle between his sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, plunging the realm into civil war. Brothers fought brothers, valleys turned against valleys, the unity of empire frayed. By the time the Spaniards marched into the highlands, the Incas were weakened not by foreign swords but by their own divisions. Imagine Cusco during this time. Once orderly streets now echo with uncertainty. Families whisper about battles in distant valleys. Priests offer prayers to the sun, asking for balance, but even the rituals feel strained. Quipicamex tie knots recording losses rather than abundance. The mountains, so steady and eternal, seem to watch with heavy silence as the empire unravels from within. Into this fracture stepped Francisco Pizarro and his small band of men. Fewer than 200 in number, they would have been no match for the Inca armies in their strength, but they carried horses, armor, and weapons that seemed to breathe thunder. They carried diseases unseen and unstoppable, and most of all, they carried the advantage of timing, arriving when the Inca realm was most vulnerable. At Cajamarca in 1532, Atahualpa, newly victorious over his brother, met the Spaniards. He came with thousands of attendants, confident in his power, but within hours he was taken prisoner, seized by men who used deception, steel, and gunpowder. The plaza that had echoed with chants and drums was filled instead with cries of confusion, the clash of blades, the neigh of horses. In that single moment, the balance of the Andes shifted. Atahualpa, even in captivity, tried to bargain. He promised to fill a room with gold and silver in exchange for his freedom. For months, treasures were gathered from across the empire, carried on llamas, and by hand offerings of temples melted down into bars. Yet when the room was filled, the Spaniards did not release him. Instead, they ended his life, and with it, the heart of the empire faltered. Still, the fall was not immediate. The Inca people resisted, retreating into mountains and valleys, fighting in quiet revolts, refusing to let their world vanish overnight. Cusco fell, but echoes of defiance lingered. Leaders rose and fell, cities were defended, roads carried not only tribute but rebellion. Yet the tide was relentless. Disease spread faster than armies, weakening villages, emptying terraces. New rulers were imposed, new gods demanded, new stones laid upon old temples. Pause here and picture a mountain village during those years. The people still plant potatoes, still weave coif, still watch the stars for signs. But whispers of change drift among them. Foreign priests arriving, foreign laws imposed, gold taken from shrines, rituals forbidden. The mountains stand as they always have. But life below shifts like soil in an earthquake. The silence of the Andes, once steady, now carries an ease. The fall of the Inca reminds us that even the greatest empires are fragile when balance is broken. Yet it also reminds us of endurance, for though the empire collapsed, the people did not vanish. Their terraces remained, their flutes still played, their llamas still grazed. Their prayers to mountains and earth still whispered. The Inca realm, as empire may have ended, but the Andean spirit continued, woven into every valley and every life that followed.